Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful reInvent. I know I've been having a blast this week. In fact, this is my first reInvent. I used to work for AWS, and it's just amazing to be here with everyone. In this session, we're going to be taking a look at some real-world defense strategies for enhancing your cyber resilience. But before we get started, I want to poll the audience here. I want to find out how many of you guys know what we do. How many folks here know what Cohesity is? Raise your hands. Awesome. All right, we got a few folks here in the audience. All right, well, we're a data management, data security platform. Our job is to protect the world's most important data. We work in the cloud, we work on-prem, and we also work in AWS. And so that's why we're here today. And I am joined by Jason with SimonMed. Jason, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Jason Severe, SimonMed Imaging. SimonMed focuses on diagnostic imaging services throughout the U.S., about 180 different locations throughout the U.S.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I'm with the Cohesity Technical Advocacy team, so this is what I do. I talk to our customers, and I love going out to these events to learn more about how you guys do security. Now, before we get started, I want to do one more poll here. How many folks here in the room work in the security space? Go ahead and raise your hand. Ah, brilliant. And how many of us here are more on the developer side? Okay, brilliant. So we got a pretty good mix here. That's great. So in this session, we're going to do a fireside chat here with SimonMed Imaging. And then towards the end of the session, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that organizations are running into out on the threat landscape with maintaining their cyber resilience, and also some different ways that you can enhance your cyber resilience within the cloud. Our panelists here today, I'm going to be your lovely moderator, Shelley, and SimonMed Imaging is going to tell us a little bit more about how they enhance their cyber resilience. So I'm going to go ahead and cruise over to the chair here because I don't know about you guys. I've been doing a lot of walking this week, and we're gonna go ahead and jump in here. All right, so Jason, share a little bit more about your background and what you do at SimonMed Imaging.
I'm the Vice President of Infrastructure at SimonMed. I've been at SimonMed now for a couple of years. I've been in healthcare IT for over 25 years, leadership for 10, and I just have found a home in healthcare.
That's amazing.
I've touched almost every version of healthcare IT, whether it's pharmacy or radiology at this point.
You know, and it's really funny that you mentioned that because I used to work in security and I worked with companies that dealt with healthcare, and it's a challenge doing security, especially with mission critical devices and systems that always have to be online. You want to make sure that they're secure, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're minimizing that impact when you're making changes within the environment.
Yeah, I mean, patient data is key to our success, right?
Right.
And its integrity and security of that data is how we grow. And, you know, one bad actor, one threat actor causes a major issue for us financially and for the patient.
Right, yeah, and I remember working with a customer that had a threat that had actually been out in the wild for a couple of years, but they had older devices, and these devices always had to stay online. And it was challenging actually going in and cleaning the threat in the environment because we wanted to make sure they had access to their devices, but at the same time, it's like you got to get the threat eradicated. So
yeah, there's always gaps in the environment, right? And we're constantly upgrading, we're constantly evolving into a better security landscape.
Yep.
You know, for a long time, security sat separate than infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now we sit at the table side by side because they can't work with us or without us.
Right. The CISOs are not at the little kids' table anymore.
Right.
That's great. Well, that's really awesome. And, you know, tell us how long you've been a Cohesity customer and how long you've been working in AWS.
At SimonMed, we've been a Cohesity customer for 4 years, and in reality, right, we made that decision to go with Cohesity even before I started there. But my system architect, who's somewhere at reInvent running around right now, you know, made that decision based on the data recovery, the data backup, the security of those backups, and all of that played into that strategy of that decision.
Now, are you guys still in the middle of your cloud migration, or have you moved completely into the AWS platform?
We are very early in our migration. With imaging, we deal with data numbers that a lot of organizations don't see.
Yeah.
Petabytes of data, not terabytes of data. And a lot of that data moves constantly. Like, I mean, 200 to 400 terabytes of moved data per week is what we look at with a rolling data of about 3.5 petabytes.
Really cool. What AWS services do you work with the most?
Currently, we're just, like I said early on, we've set up our transit gateways, we've set up our VPGs, and some of that is a shared responsibility model for us, right? And with Cohesity, we've actually implemented their Fort Knox product to give us an air gap solution that not only are we replicating between our two data centers, but as we get ready to maybe shut down a data center and make AWS our primary, we have that data safe and secure out.
Very cool. And that actually brings up a really good point. How many of us here know what a cloud vault is? Raise your hand. Oh my goodness, I'm getting like 2 people in the audience. Okay, so with cloud vaulting, what this does is it allows you to keep your data in a secure vault, which is hosted either on the AWS platform. We also support some other cloud providers here. But the idea is that when you do recovery, it's going to basically use a chain of command to approve the recovery process. And we do this using a feature called Quorum. So that's what Jason's referring to when he mentions Fort Knox. This is our cyber vaulting product, because for a lot of organizations out there, we want to use that 3-2-1 backup method. We don't want to just keep our data backed up in one place. We want to keep it in different parts of the organization. So vaulting is one way that you can go about doing it. Awesome. Yeah. That's great.
We love it.
Well, let's see here. So, based on your experience, what's some challenges that, you think that companies face when dealing with cyber resilience?
Well, the BCDR landscape has changed significantly over the time, right? Yeah. We used to worry about a data center going away, and that's why you had a second data center. Yeah. Today, we worry about that threat actor or that ransomware attack, and we're replicating that data from one site to another. I see that as the biggest problem, and air gapping that solution out to Fort Knox, marking our secondary copy of Cohesity backups as immutable, all of that helps prevent that from replicating over.
Right. Yeah, and if for a lot of companies out there, your data may be fragmented, or you may not know truly what your data footprint is. That's a challenge that I saw when working at Amazon and also working in previous roles in security. So yeah, understanding your data footprint, being able to go and get business intelligence or security intelligence from it is huge. So yeah, no, that's a really good point that you bring up there, Jason. It's just the data fragmentation. And I guess that kind of leads to the question, with your critical workloads, what are some ways that you've increased your cyber resilience?
I mean, for us, it's really about how do we move that from one site to another? How do we keep that in sync and keep our patient data protected while keeping it segmented enough to protect it? And we use lots of tools to increase that. We make sure our XDR solution's up to date. All of that plays in. But really, when an attack occurs, you're looking at your data recovery and backup as your ripcord to safety.
Right. Yeah, and that's always the tricky part, because you want to gather evidence if you're dealing with an active security event, but you also want to bring your workloads back online. And that's something at Cohesity that we've been working on. We have a clean room solution that we're in the process of rolling out, which gives you the ability to recover an infected snapshot into an isolated sandbox type environment. Now, I know here at Amazon, for a lot of you may think of clean rooms as something that you would use more from an AI perspective, like analyzing data sets. There's a lot of different use cases that you can use for clean rooms. Security response is another one. You can recover your data into an isolated environment. You can gather evidence. You may want to learn more about the threat. Maybe it's a new threat variant and you need to build out some YARA rules so you can better protect yourself against it. So these are all just different ways that you can improve cyber resilience, but Jason brings up a really good point. It's like at some point you're going to want to recover and bring your data back online. And one question I have for you, Jason, is do you use like the file level recovery, or do you typically just recover the entire VM snapshot?
It depends, right? If we were looking at let's say we patched a server, right, on patch Monday or patch Tuesday, and we said, okay, we've patched the server, it broke something in production. We would use instant VM recovery to bring that VM back to the state it was prior to that patch, and we're up. I mean, it significantly reduces our RTO and getting that system back online.
Yep. And every workload's going to have their own RPO, RTO. If you're not familiar with that acronym, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, it's always a tricky balance because you never know. It's like you may need to bring this workload back online within an hour and have your data saved within that hour as well. So it really just depends on the workload that you're working with. And let me just see here. Oh, this is a good one. So for testing and validation purposes, when you're testing out a new cyber resilience plan, what do you guys do over at SimonMed?
Well, I mean, we spend a lot of time going through scenarios, tabletop exercises, making sure our playbook's up to date, right? Until you do that tabletop exercise and run through what it would look like if you had an issue, you don't know if your playbook's gonna work. And in a critical situation, everybody's panicked, everybody's running around. They're not thinking about stop, wait, move on to the next step, the next step. And if you do that in an unorganized manner, you could just restore the threat back to the original point.
That's a really good point. I love that you mentioned tabletop exercises. I'm active in the security B-sides community, and there's a card game that you can get from Black Hills Information Security called Breaches and Backdoors. No, it's not a popular tabletop RPG game. Breaches and Backdoors allows you to go in and do incident response scenarios with your team so you can kind of understand who you need to work with when responding to an event. And I know here within the AWS community, we have game day exercises. And the great part about game day exercises, it's almost like back in school when we were doing fire drills as kids, going out to a particular part of the building. Like, what do you do if there's a fire? The same applies with security. And so, a couple tidbits I would also add to what Jason mentioned is not only going through the process, but maybe take a variable out, like test your recovery without Active Directory in the mix. Test out your recovery without DNS in the mix. Find those different fail points, because if you know ahead of time what you need to do, it's going to make that day go so much better. Because I know working in the past with folks dealing with virus outbreaks or other types of attacks, you get emotional. You're scared.
Yeah, you have a C guy standing behind you telling you recover it now.
Yeah.
So you move in a very erratic way, and you end up in a worse shape than you were when you started.
100%. 100%. I always think back to Star Trek. I don't know how many Star Trek nerds we have in the room, but they always go to the ready room. They always sit there and they talk for 5 to 10 minutes. Always cracks me up. But it kind of shows, when you're in that type of situation, you really got to be methodical and just really think through what you're doing so you can get that best outcome. No, that's great. Just a couple closing questions, Jason. What are some outcomes that you've achieved with Cohesity that you'd like to share with the audience?
It's really our ability to shrink that RTO down, right? How quickly can we get back up? Yeah. Everybody will sit and talk in a room about, we need 5 nines of uptime. Yeah. Well, as operation IT people, right, we can give you that, but there's a cost to that. Yeah. And then explaining that cost is really difficult to the guy who signs the checks, right, or is part of the budget process. Mm-hmm. So we've had to come up with a way, and with Cohesity, with AWS, find a way to really shrink that RTO and get that RPO as close to right away as we can. Yeah. And we've done a pretty good job of it, right? That instant VM recovery really, really helps us.
That's great. So that's one of the kind of the business cases that you built.
Yeah.
And reporting it to your leadership. Yeah. That's awesome.
We all have a boss.
Yes, we do. No, that's great. And just, for the next 12 months, do you have any particular cyber resilience priorities that you're working on?
Well, I mean, our cyber resilience priorities go towards continuing our journey into AWS. Okay. Right? And what does that look like? How do we protect that 3 petabytes of image data? How do we make sure our patients are protected and that data is secure? Because ultimately, as an organization, that's our end goal, right? We're not successful unless our patients are protected.
100%. No, that's great. And and then this threat landscape is constantly changing, so priorities change along with that as well. Yeah. So that's wonderful. Yeah, a lot of folks out there that I've talked to, they're in the middle of their multi-year cloud migration journey, and it's just interesting to learn more about what companies are doing. I know for a lot of folks, you may not only be doing a lift and shift into the cloud, you may be refactoring your applications. You may be going towards serverless or have stateless workloads. And that's the great part about AWS, is it gives you that flexibility. And from a Cohesity perspective, we want to support you on your cloud migration journey. And what we're going to do in this next section, we're just going to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that a lot of companies are running into out in the security community. But before we do that, Jason, were there any other parting words that you wanted to add?
No, I think I'm in a, SimonMed has put us in a good place. And being a part of that team is really relevant. And, I couldn't do this without my team. It's not a single person on an engineering staff or a development staff that prevents a bad actor. So it's everybody.
Absolutely.
There's no silos in protecting for cyber resilience.
100%. 100%. Now, that's one of the things I love about where we're moving in on the security side. We have DevSecOps teams that are working with developers to help secure the entire software development lifecycle. We're really understanding that we work together as a team, especially when it comes to security. And we've actually polled a lot of companies, out in the community on what they're running into from a cyber resilience perspective, and just some things that we've noticed, from our peers. And by the way, these numbers, we actually have a report out on our website that I can share with you after this session if you want to learn more. But some of the things that we've ran into we've seen from a company perspective is, the people that we talk to, 93% of the security community has felt the pressure from ransomware attacks in particular. And I just did a presentation on this earlier with our cyber event response team, and we're seeing this across all industries, all verticals. The threat landscape is becoming ever more aggressive. I've been in this space for about 20 years, and when I first started, computer viruses were almost like a novelty, back in the early 2000s. But now we're seeing, nation state attacks. We're seeing threat actors monetizing, these attacks so they can make money. And so, yeah, we're definitely seeing the impact even now in 2024. 80% of folks expressed concerns about their organization's cyber resilience strategy. Something that Jason mentioned earlier is that, for a lot of companies out there, your data could be fragmented. It may be spread across multiple environments. Maybe your company just did an acquisition, or maybe you're a third-party hosting provider and you're supporting multiple companies from a security perspective. So that's another key factor there. The other one would say, a lot of companies are concerned about long recovery times. And this is something that I ran into when I worked at AWS. A lot of companies that I worked with, had different maturity levels when it came to their backup and recovery model. And sometimes, for some companies, you may be required to not only back up and recover, but, recover to a hot site, depending on the priority of your workloads. So that's another key factor there. And then the final one is 32% of people say that long recovery times are due to antiquated backup and recovery systems. And oh my goodness, that is a true story, especially if you work in the multi-cloud space. You may not only be required to keep your workloads within AWS, you may be required to keep your workloads in a different cloud provider from a compliance and security perspective. So these are all common variables that we've seen. And from an impact perspective, because we polled a group of folks on this, the question was, in the event of an attack or an outage, how long would it take you to recover and get back online? 95% say that it could take over 24 hours. 71% said that it could take over 4 days. 41% said that it could take over a week, which is interesting because I've talked to folks where they've mentioned, yeah, it took me a couple weeks to get back online. Imagine the amount of money that you're losing during that time if you're working with a typical business. Even more if it's during the holidays. Black Friday, guys. You want to make money. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can enhance your cyber resilience in the cloud. I'm going to kind of add a little bit more color to this section and talk a bit more about my personal experiences, because I've worked with large companies dealing with their security needs, and like we mentioned earlier, it's a really tough situation when you're having to report information to your leadership while responding to an attack. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just from a high level, within Cohesity, the way that we look at cyber resilience is that we want to improve your security efficiency. We want to reduce the risk of impact, because when you're in a situation where you're dealing with a ransomware attack, time is the most important variable. You want to respond quickly. You want to limit the spread of that attack. And so we do this by integrating in with a lot of popular security solutions, SOAR platforms, and other tools that you can use to help make your security operations more efficient. Because for most companies out there, your backup and recovery team may be a different group than your security team. And so we want to partner with that other team to make sure that you can get back online quickly. And that kind of leads into the next key point. We want to safely respond. We want to safely recover. And so the idea is that we want to isolate the attack. We want to have the ability to potentially recover into an isolated sandbox if we're gathering evidence, and also make sure that we have rapid recovery of your critical data. And the way we do this is a couple of different ways. Excuse me. We have the ability to do a full VM recovery. We also have the ability to do an instant volume mount restore, or we can recover at the file level. So we have a couple different ways that we can recover. The other key factor is that we want to help improve your threat detection. So we have tools like Cohesity DataHawk, which give you the ability to stream in threat intelligence, including your own threat intelligence feeds if you're a large company and you have your own threat intelligence team. We have the ability to pipe that into our interface so that if you are dealing with an emerging threat, you have the ability to gather that data and understand what workloads could potentially be getting impacted. So that's how we do cyber resilience at Cohesity. And I think the other thing I would add, and this is just working in the AWS community for a while, is I know for a lot of folks here, you may have your own tools that you use that integrate in with AWS APIs. And I do want to let the audience know that we have really good comprehensive API documentation. So if you want to create your own customized API integrations, we do offer that as well. And you can find out more information at developer.cohesity.com. One other thing that we do is we integrate into the NIST cybersecurity framework. How many of us here have heard of the NIST cybersecurity framework? Okay, we've got a few folks in the audience. All right, excellent. So this is NIST, NIST.org is well-renowned within the community, and they've created their own framework that we integrate into. The idea is that we want to touch into each of these different key pillars, starting with the identify phase. And you'll notice up here at the top, we have some bubbles here that are in, I guess, pink or fuchsia. And basically what that means is that we have a direct integration with a data security alliance member. So, by default, we integrate in with threat intelligence feeds. We do data discovery. If you've ever heard of cloud data discovery, what this means is that when we are creating backups of your data, we're also scanning for threats, and we're scanning your data for sensitive information. Because one of the things that we've seen with threat actors, especially when you're dealing with ransomware, is they will try to move laterally throughout your network. They will try to download information from a command and control server. So if you have a particular server that you're dealing with that you think may be infected, it could show a large volume of information getting downloaded to that server because basically the threat actor is using it as a staging point. So that's what we mean when we say data classification. We also do things like we integrate in with Tenable for vulnerability scanning, so we could scan your backups for potential vulnerabilities. I'm sure most of you here know, Microsoft Patch Tuesday, they're coming out with updates all the time. It's literally like the Wild West out there. So we do integrate in with Tenable, and I know there's a lot of tools within AWS that can also help you as well from a vulnerability perspective. At the protect phase, we have the ability to do things like data isolation. We support MFA. I always recommend MFA often, especially when you're working with critical workloads. And then from a detect phase, we also have the ability to detect threats and automatically respond with those key DSA integrations. And so a lot of different vendors out there. I'll show you some of the vendors that we have here in just a moment. But from a response standpoint, we have the ability to do things like file system forensics, sandbox analysis, going back to what we were talking about earlier with clean rooms. And we also have the ability to extract threat artifacts if you're gathering evidence for your security operations team. Because for most organizations, if you are dealing with an active security event, you're going to want to do a postmortem lessons learned to understand how the threat got into your environment and how you can better secure yourself in the future. And then, of course, recovery. And we have the ability to do instant recovery, mass recovery if you're working with a larger workload, and targeted recovery as well. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Happy little button. Excellent. All right, I love this slide because it kind of shows you some of the different integrations that we have to help improve cyber resilience. I do want to remind the audience that we also do offer our API documentation online. I know within the AWS community that is huge. We do offer that as well, but these are some pre-built integrations that we offer through our DSA Alliance, and you can actually access these integrations for free if you're a Cohesity customer. And so just to kind of walk you through this here, we offer integration into vulnerability scanning tools like Tenable. We also offer integrations into automated ransomware response tools. So think SOAR platforms, maybe like Cisco XDR, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, among others. We also integrate into Netscope, which is a CASB solution. I don't know, how many of us here have worked with CASBs before? Anybody know what a CASB is? All right, it's a cloud access security broker, because you know us in technology, we love our acronyms, but cloud access security broker is great, and it was really popular a couple of years ago during COVID, because for a lot of us, we were working from home. We were not in the office, and we want to make sure that no matter what, our environment is protected. So it works great if you're working in a company where you have a bring your own devices type setup. Data loss prevention, this is another integration that we offer. If you have not heard of data loss prevention, basically the idea is that you can monitor for sensitive information that could potentially be leaving your environment, and it will block any suspicious activity, which is great. And we're starting to see a movement now towards data security posture management, which is what we see on that last pillar there, with intelligent data protection. And we support a lot of popular vendors like Cyera, Normalize, Big ID, all of these different vendors we work with if you have a DSPM solution in your environment. And from a Cohesity perspective, we give you the flexibility to either deploy a virtual appliance or a physical appliance. And you can also use our Cohesity Data Protect delivered as a service if you do not want to manage the infrastructure piece. So we have a lot of flexibility there. And I also want to call out that we support multi-cloud, although I do encourage you to consider AWS because I love AWS. But we do also support Cohesity on the AWS platform. And yeah, it's good stuff. All right, we're just about ready to wrap up here, but I just want to quickly mention that we have a lot of case studies out on our website that I highly recommend that you check out. And I'm really excited that SimonMed was able to join us today. It's been wonderful working with you, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
But yeah, NASDAQ, they're one of our customers. They were able to restore email within 5 minutes down from 4 days. Now, just imagine being without email for 4 days. That's not fun. Skylights Medical, they were able to pay $0 during a ransomware attack. They were able to get their data back online. And Nationwide Insurance, they were able to save $2 million in annual savings after upgrading to Cohesity. And we just won Storage Partner of the Year. So we just found that out on Monday. So very exciting. And that's pretty much it. I just want to thank everyone for joining. If you have any questions, I highly encourage you to stick around after the session. We'd love to answer your questions. Also, you'll get a survey for this session. I encourage you to fill it out. We'd love to get your feedback. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. Thanks, everyone.